Have you ever done something you thought was harmless, only to realize later it shattered everything you cared about? This is the story of how one small choice changed a family forever. Relationships are built on trust, but what happens when that trust is broken? Today we're diving into a heart-wrenching story of love, loneliness, and betrayal. A story that reminds us how fragile the bonds of family can be. Stick around, because the twist at the end will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty. On the outside, everything looked perfect for Emma. She had a loving husband, Jake, a beautiful home, and a teenage son, Ethan, who meant the world to her. But inside, Emma felt hollow. Her marriage to Jake had become a series of routines, polite conversations, and distant silences. She felt invisible, unseen, and unheard in her own home. It wasn't that Jake didn't care, he did, but life had worn them down. The stress of work, raising a child, and simply existing as a family had left little room for affection. And in the quiet moments when Emma sat alone, she couldn't help but feel empty. Then Alex entered her life. Alex wasn't the kind of man Emma thought she'd ever notice. He was quiet and unassuming, yet there was something about him that made her feel safe. They worked together in the same department, and though they'd exchanged pleasantries for years, Emma hadn't paid much attention to him until a small but pivotal moment brought them closer. It was a particularly chaotic Monday morning. Emma had spilled coffee on her blouse, missed her train, and barely made it to the office before an important meeting. Frazzled and on edge, she stumbled into the break room to grab another cup of coffee, hoping for a moment of calm. Alex was there, sitting alone with a book in hand. He glanced up and gave her an easy smile. "Rough start?" he asked, his voice calm and reassuring. That was the first real conversation they'd ever had. Emma vented about her hectic morning, and Alex listened attentively, nodding at the right moments and even making her laugh with a dry joke about how Mondays seemed to have a personal vendetta against humanity. She walked away from that conversation feeling lighter, her mood unexpectedly lifted. After that day, Emma found herself bumping into Alex more often. At first, it was purely coincidental, passing each other in the hallway, sharing a laugh over a meeting that ran too long. But over time, those moments became intentional. She started looking for excuses to talk to him, a question about a project, a casual comment about the weather, or even just a smile across the office. She told herself it was innocent, just two colleagues becoming friends. Then came the text. It started with a simple message after work. One evening, "You did great in that meeting today. Don't let those tough questions get to you." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest as she read it. It was such a small gesture, but it felt deeply personal, like Alex had seen her in a way no one else had lately. She replied with a quick thank you, and that was that. But it wasn't just that. A few days later, there was another text. "Have you read the article I sent you? I thought of you while reading it. It's right up your alley." And then another, "How's your day going? Hope it's better than Monday." At first, Emma tried to justify it. It's just a colleague being kind, she thought. People text their coworkers all the time. But soon, those texts became more frequent and more personal. They started sharing jokes, venting about work stress, and even confiding in each other about their personal lives. Emma learned that Alex had recently gone through a breakup and was trying to find his footing again. She found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else, not even Jake. The first time Emma realized she was crossing a line was when she lied to Jake about who she was texting. She'd been sitting on the couch, scrolling through her messages, when Alex sent her a funny meme about their boss. She laughed out loud, and Jake looked up from his book. "What's so funny?" he asked, smiling at her. Panicking, Emma quickly locked her phone and replied, "Oh, just something from a coworker." She hated how guilty she felt in that moment, but she brushed it off, telling herself it wasn't a big deal. Her connection with Alex deepened. They started grabbing coffee together before work. Sitting alone in a quiet corner of the cafe, Alex had a way of making her feel seen, like she mattered. He remembered the little details she shared, like how much she loved rainy days or how she always wanted to visit Italy. Jake used to notice those things too, back when they were newly married, but somewhere along the way, life had dulled the spark between them. One afternoon, as they walked back to the office from lunch, Alex said something that stopped Emma in her tracks. "You know," he began, glancing at her with an earnest expression, "I feel like I can tell you anything. You're so easy to talk to, Emma. It's rare to meet someone like you." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She knew those words were dangerous, knew she should shut the conversation down. But instead, she smiled and replied, "I feel the same way about you." That evening, lying in bed next to Jake, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Alex. She replayed their conversations in her mind, lingering on the way he made her laugh, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Guilt tugged at her, but it was drowned out by a growing sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about Alex, it was about the way he made her feel. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt alive, vibrant, and seen. She knew she was playing with fire, but she convinced herself that as long as it stayed emotional, it wasn't truly betrayal. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she told herself. "It's just a friendship." But it wasn't just a friendship. Emma began guarding her phone like a secret treasure, checking it constantly for Alex's messages. She started dressing differently for work, choosing outfits she thought he might notice. And every time Alex complimented her, whether it was about her laugh, her intelligence, or the way she looked in her favorite blue dress, Emma felt a thrill that both exhilarated and terrified her. Their relationship reached a tipping point one Friday evening. The office was nearly empty, and Emma and Alex were working late to finish a project. As they wrapped up, Alex leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You know," he said softly, "I really enjoy spending time with you. Emma, you make the hard days worth it." Emma froze, her heart pounding. She knew what he was saying, what he meant, but she couldn't bring herself to shut it down. Instead, she smiled weakly and mumbled, "I enjoy spending time with you too." As she drove home that night, the weight of what was happening hit her. This wasn't just a harmless friendship anymore. She was betraying Jake even if nothing physical had happened. But as much as she wanted to end things with Alex, she didn't know how. He had become her escape, her safe haven, and walking away from that felt impossible. It was a quiet Thursday evening, and the house was unusually still. Emma sat at the dining table, her laptop open in front of her, but her attention wasn't on the spreadsheet she was supposed to be working on. Her phone buzzed softly beside her, a text from Alex. She glanced around, ensuring she was alone, then picked it up with trembling fingers. Alex's text read, "I can't stop thinking about you. Do you ever feel the same?" The words sent a jolt through Emma, both thrilling and terrifying. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. A dozen emotions hit her all at once: excitement, guilt, fear. She knew she shouldn't reply, but her fingers hovered over the keyboard anyway. Just as she began typing a response, a voice cut through the silence. "Mom?" Startled, Emma quickly locked her phone and looked up. It was Ethan, standing in the doorway with a confused look on his face. His hair was tousled from the couch where he'd been playing video games, but his sharp, questioning gaze made her heart drop. "What are you doing?" he asked, stepping into the room. His eyes flicked to the phone Emma had hastily placed face down on the table. She forced a smile, trying to act nonchalant. "Oh, just catching up on some work emails," she said, her voice faltering slightly. Ethan didn't look convinced. "Who are you texting?" "You looked nervous." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to dismiss his question, brush it off as nothing, but her son wasn't a child anymore. He could sense when something was off, and his curiosity was piqued. "Just a friend," she replied too quickly, her tone defensive. Ethan's expression shifted, confusion turning to suspicion. "A friend from work?" he asked, his voice tinged with an edge Emma hadn't heard before. She nodded, avoiding his gaze, but the way she gripped her phone betrayed her. Ethan didn't press further, but Emma could feel his unease as he lingered for a moment. Before retreating back to the living room, she exhaled, her heart pounding in her chest, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. For the first time, the weight of her actions felt like it might crush her. She told herself it was just a moment, a small misstep, but deep down, she knew the cracks were starting to show. That night, when she went to bed, Emma found herself lying wide awake beside Jake, who was already fast asleep. She couldn't shake the look on Ethan's face or the way his tone had shifted. She stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with guilt and fear. What if Ethan told Jake? What if everything unraveled? But Emma didn't realize just how quickly her secret was about to come to light. The following afternoon, while Emma was still at work, she received a frantic text from Ethan. "We need to talk. I know what's going on." Her heart sank as she stared at the message, her pulse pounding in her ears. She tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. Panic overtook her as she imagined all the ways he could have discovered her secret. Had he overheard something? Seen her messages by accident? When she got home that evening, the confrontation she dreaded was waiting for her. Ethan was in the kitchen, arms crossed, his face flushed with anger. "You lied to me," he said bluntly as she walked in. "I know you're not just friends with that guy." Emma's stomach churned. "Ethan, I don't know what you think you saw," she began, but he cut her off. "Don't lie to me again, Mom." "I went through your phone." Her blood ran cold. Ethan's voice was trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak as he continued. "I saw everything, the texts, the jokes, the things you've been hiding from Dad. How could you do this to him? How could you do this to us?" Emma froze, the full weight of his words crashing down on her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The room seemed to spin around her as Ethan's accusations hit her like a storm. "You always tell me to be honest, to be a good person, and this is what you're doing?" He shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. "Ethan, it's not what you think." She finally managed, her voice trembling. "Nothing happened. Alex and I are just friends." But even as the words left her mouth, she knew how hollow they sounded. Ethan's eyes were filled with betrayal. "Friends don't text each other like that. Mom, friends don't say the things you said to him." Her son's pain was unbearable to witness. She reached out to him, desperate to comfort him, but he stepped back. "Don't," he said sharply. "I can't even look at you right now." That night, Ethan told Jake everything. Emma sat frozen on the couch as Jake confronted her, his face pale, his voice shaking with hurt and anger. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded. Emma tried to explain, to justify, but Jake's expression stopped her. "Don't try to downplay this, Emma," he said. "You've been lying to me, to all of us. Do you even understand what you've done?" Emma broke down, tears streaming down her face as she tried to apologize, but Jake wasn't ready to hear it. "I trusted you," he said quietly, the weight of his disappointment cutting deeper than any shouted accusation could. "I thought we were partners. How could you do this?" In the days that followed, the atmosphere in their home was unbearable. Jake moved into the guest room, barely speaking to Emma. Ethan avoided her entirely, his anger and sadness radiating every time they crossed paths. Emma had destroyed the foundation of her family, and the realization left her feeling hollow. The days that followed were some of the darkest Emma had ever experienced. The home that once felt warm and alive was now cold and fractured. Jake barely spoke to her. When he did, his words were clipped, polite, and painfully distant, as if they were two strangers sharing the same space. Ethan, however, was not so reserved. His silence was loud and cutting, and his glares stung more than any words ever could. He wouldn't sit at the dinner table with her, wouldn't let her hug him, and refused to engage in even the smallest conversations. It was as though Emma had ceased to exist in his world. One night, Emma overheard Ethan talking to one of his friends on the phone. His voice was low and pained. "I can't believe she'd do that to Dad," he said. "She's not who I thought she was." Hearing those words broke her, heart in ways she hadn't imagined. She wanted to burst into his room, to explain herself, to somehow make him understand that she hadn't meant to hurt anyone. But she knew deep down that her explanations would sound like excuses, and excuses couldn't fix this. Jake's presence in the house was a constant reminder of what she'd lost. They had built a life together, a family, a home, a partnership that had weathered years of ups and downs. Now, all of that felt like it was hanging by a thread. One evening, as they sat in the living room in suffocating silence, Jake finally spoke. "Do you even know what you've done?" he asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "You didn't just betray me, Emma. You betrayed us, this family. You made our son question everything he thought he knew about trust." Emma tried to respond, but her voice cracked under the weight of her guilt. "I never meant for it to get this far," she whispered. "I was lonely, Jake. I felt invisible." But as the words left her mouth, she hated herself for them. How could she justify her actions? How could she possibly make Jake and Ethan see that it wasn't about them, that it had been about her own emptiness, her own selfish choices? Jake shook his head, his expression one of disappointment and sorrow. "Lonely?" he repeated. "And you think I wasn't? You think this marriage hasn't been hard for me too? But I didn't go looking for someone else to fill the gaps." His words stung because they were true. Emma had allowed her loneliness to consume her, to cloud her judgment, and in doing so, she had destroyed the very thing she had been longing for: connection, love, and trust. Work became her only escape, but even there, the guilt followed her. Every time she saw Alex, she felt a mix of anger and regret. She resented him for his part in all of this, even though she knew the fault was as much hers as his. Alex, sensing the shift, began to pull away. Their once vibrant conversations faded into awkward exchanges, and eventually, they stopped speaking altogether. It was a bitter ending to something Emma had once believed was harmless. At home, Ethan's hurt was the hardest to bear. He had always been her rock, her confidant, her reason for pushing through the tough days. Now he barely acknowledged her presence. One afternoon, she tried to approach him in his room. "Ethan, can we talk?" she asked softly, standing in the doorway. He didn't even look up from his desk. "What's there to talk about?" he replied coldly. "You lied to us. You lied to me. And now I don't even know who you are." His words were like daggers to her heart. Emma realized that her actions hadn't just broken her marriage, they had shattered the bond she had with her son. And rebuilding that bond felt impossible. Every attempt she made to reach out to him was met with resistance, with walls she couldn't break through. She couldn't blame him for shutting her out. After all, she had been the one to teach him that trust could be broken. As weeks turned into months, the weight of what she had done began to settle in her. Chest like a stone she couldn't dislodge. She had destroyed the delicate balance of her family for a fleeting sense of attention and validation. The irony was cruel. She had wanted to feel seen and loved, but now she was more alone than ever. But Emma wasn't ready to give up. She knew she had to try, no matter how long it took, to rebuild what she had broken. She started with small gestures, making breakfast for Ethan even though he barely acknowledged it, leaving handwritten notes on his desk, reminding him that she loved him, and showing up to his soccer games even when he acted like he didn't notice her in the stands. It was agonizingly slow, and most days it felt like nothing was changing. But Emma held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, her consistency would begin to chip away at the walls between them. With Jake, the process was even harder. Their conversations were strained, filled with long pauses and half-finished sentences. Emma wanted to tell him how much she regretted everything, how much she still loved him. But she didn't know if he wanted to hear it. One evening, she finally found the courage to ask, "Do you think we can ever come back from this?" Jake looked at her for a long time before answering. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way." Those words stayed with Emma. She realized that rebuilding trust wasn't something she could rush or force. It was something she had to earn, day by day, moment by moment. And even then, there were no guarantees. She couldn't undo the hurt she had caused, but she could try to show Jake and Ethan that she was willing to put in the work to be better. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and her thoughts were too loud to ignore, Emma reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the choices she had made, the lies she had told herself, and the damage she had caused. She realized that betrayal isn't just about what you do, it's about what you let yourself become. And in trying to fill her own emptiness, she had hurt the people she loved most. Emma's story is a painful reminder that trust, once broken, leaves scars that may never fully heal. She learned the hard way that love isn't just about feeling, it's about showing up, being honest, and choosing the people who matter most, even when it's hard. While she continued to hope for reconciliation with her family, she knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Looking back, Emma realized that betrayal isn't always about grand acts of disloyalty. Sometimes it's the small choices, the lies we tell ourselves, that lead us down a path we can't come back from. Her story is a reminder that trust, once broken, leaves scars that may never fully heal. Emma's family was never the same. Jake and Ethan both struggled to forgive her, and though she worked tirelessly to rebuild their trust, the road was long and uncertain. She learned the hard way that love isn't just about feeling, it's about showing up, being honest, and protecting the people who matter most. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story about trust, love, and the consequences of betrayal. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more emotional and thought-provoking tales. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. See you in the next video.